When most people consider their favourite of something, it's often incredibly personal. I like sharing opinions because it'll give me a new perspective on something I've seen countless times, or maybe give me a newfound appreciation for something I didn't give much credit to. With all that in mind, I'm going to be discussing my favourite film in the now defunct Fox X-Men universe. And no, it's not this one, or even this one. My favourite X-Men film is X-Men First Class. This film, directed by Matthew Vaughn and written by Vaughn, Ashley Miller, Jane Goldman and Zack Stentz, is an encapsulation of everything I enjoy about the X-Men films. The characters feel more like people, the story is just as goofy and silly as mutants in the 60s should be, and most importantly, the story is a personal one, focusing on Charles, Eric and Raven, not Professor X, Magneto and Mystique. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to explain why I love this film, and in particular these three characters, in more detail. So without further ado, my name is Character Studied, and let's begin with Eric Lenscher. The film opens the same way that the franchise does, with Magneto in Auschwitz discovering his powers. The film expands upon this moment with the introduction of Kevin Bacon's Sebastian Shaw. This is a fitting beginning to the film, as it started as an X-Men Origins Magneto film, until that franchise crashed and burned into nothingness after one installment. It is for this reason that we don't see the title card until after Magneto's journey begins, and he unleashes his power intentionally for the first time. The title card in question? The inverse of the coin that started Eric's path to becoming Magneto, a symbolic representation of how Charles and Eric are two sides of the same coin, an idea that is heavily referenced in the original trilogy and that is built up throughout this film. I love that Eric's mission is condensed the way that it is, so that the majority of the film is spent on developing his relationship with Charles. But my god, do I love how Eric is reintroduced as an adult in this scene. Fassbender acts as a devoted, vengeful, and angry man who hasn't had anything but his mission for his entire life, and yet he also plays a man who is willing to be patient. He doesn't destroy the bar or enter in anger, he enters calmly, orders a drink with the men, and then reveals his identity. He murders all three patrons in a fantastically controlled way, and it's all in service of him surprising Shaw. And he probably would have been able to kill him right here if Shaw didn't have Frost to protect him. Because it wasn't just that Eric wanted Shaw dead, he wanted to know how much pain and suffering he had caused him. If he wanted him dead, Eric could have just thrown the knife at him the same way he did with this man at the bar. But Eric doesn't want that, and that's what is fascinating about the way his character is written and portrayed, and something I love watching upon repeat viewings. However, after his character meets Charles at the 36-minute mark, we see a whole new side to Eric, one where he likes being a part of a team, and he revels in not being alone for the first time since his mother died. It's no coincidence that Charles' first words to Eric are,
"You have to let go,"
in reference to the submarine he's trying to move, but also symbolically in relation to the anger that he's held for their whole life. Eric immediately lashes out at Charles, but once he calms his mind, the first thing Eric says to Charles speaks to his pain over the years, as he states,
"I thought I was alone."
This one phrase screams to the opportunity Charles then gives him in working with the younger mutants. He actually does just as much for the team as Charles does in this way. He encourages Raven to be proud of her mutation. He encourages Banshee in another way, revealing the extent of his powers, and he is shown how to access the highest levels of his own powers by Charles, offering him a new viewpoint of his life and his powers. However, this connection to others, and particularly to Charles, is shattered the moment Eric gets the chance to get his revenge on Shaw. He locks Charles out of his mind and kills Shaw with the same coin he couldn't move to save his mother all those years ago. But it's more complex than that. As Eric tells Shaw, he agrees with him. He sees mutants as the future of mankind and, after a display of weapons from the US and Russia, states that belief to the mutants on both sides. This is where Eric understands the dichotomy himself as he tells Charles, a man he thinks of as a brother,
We want the same thing.
only to have this person look him in the eyes and tell him,
My friend, I'm sorry, but we do not.
This look of pain and melancholy by Eric leads to his speech of disillusionment with humanity and his desire to create his own society, the Brotherhood of Mutants. The film then ends the way it began, with Eric and his completed arc, where he accepts his role as
Magneto.
This is an incredible character journey, and the film takes many moments of pause to truly focus on the evolution of Eric. But it's an evolution that couldn't have happened without Charles Xavier. From the first moments in the film, we are shown the dichotomy of Charles and Eric. Eric's childhood was rough and full of pain, anger, and loneliness. Charles, on the other hand, grew up in a mansion with his absent parents and took on Raven as a sister. He was never alone, never shunned or experimented on for his abilities, because he didn't outwardly show it to people. He also writes a thesis detailing mutants and how their arrival led to the extinction of a less evolved species, hinting towards the end of Eric's journey. But Charles himself goes through the film with an eagerness to combine the powers of human and mutant in an attempt to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. He so desperately wants to connect everyone, and to see all the world's mutants live without fear of their power, and all the world's humans live without fear of the mutants. This film shows Charles' idealized version of the future. Mutants and humans working side by side to make the world a better place, with mutants fighting battles that humans can't. However, it's not meant to be, as the moment the CIA is attacked by Shaw and they're left to their own devices, Charles gives one of his motivational speeches and rallies the X-Men. He then sets out to assist every member in enhancing their abilities. He assures Alex that his power can be controlled. He encourages Hank to embrace his mutation, as previously mentioned. He also unlocks Eric's true power. The pair share their recurring chess game and discuss their beliefs for the future after the events Shaw has set in motion. Charles believes humans are good, and Eric believes that at their foundation all humans are no better than Shaw. But Charles ignores this because this is the prototype for what will become the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, and it's the first step in achieving Charles's dream. Unfortunately, the plan goes awry when both the US and Russia turn their weapons against the mutants, and Magneto makes his play to win over the mutants. This creates an interesting resolution as Charles loses the use of his legs due to a combination of human and mutant violence, his relationship with Moira, and his lifelong sister figure and friend in Raven. And yet, despite doing the right thing and still experiencing all this loss, Charles perseveres and continues with his plans to set up his school and raise mutants. This speaks to Charles's good-hearted nature and optimistic belief in a world where humans and mutants work together, a polar opposite of Eric's pure and unbridled distrust of all humans. But there is an area in between both of their views, and no character better embodies that than Raven. Raven presents herself as the most interesting case in the film and is portrayed as the middle ground amongst Charles and Eric. Her first scene with Charles implies that she's had to use her shapeshifting powers to survive throughout her childhood, but when she is caught using them by a fellow mutant, one far more nurturing than Shaw, she is shown understanding and kindness as opposed to contempt and punishment like Eric. Her character has the biggest arc in the film as she begins with contempt for humans and particularly the idea that they're insignificant mutations and by extension their pride of them. However, that initial disdain and disgust evolves throughout the film, as her shapeshifting causes a visceral reaction from the CIA and others throughout the film. This is why she spends so much of the second act in her blending in state, as even with her own kind, she feels like she can't be herself. The first person that shows outward interest and compassion towards her blue form is Eric, and while she attempts to start a relationship with Hank, his own insecurities further enforce her own ideas that her mutant form isn't acceptable. This leads to her to find comfort in Eric. He rejects her because she still doesn't believe her blue form is desirable, something he disapproves. She confronts Charles about it and he is surprised by her hard-edged demeanour. She explodes at Charles, stating that she wanted it to be the two of them against the world, but she finally understands that Charles wants to be a part of the world and not against it. It's after the final battle, when Magneto makes his speech, that she understands that she hates humanity for making her feel like who she is in her natural blue form isn't beautiful or acceptable. And it's with this understanding that she leaves Charles and joins Magneto's crusade. This journey and transformation Raven undergoes shows how someone that is shunned for being who they are can transform and warp into a hateful and spiteful entity, and one that doesn't see peace as an option anymore. This is the change that Raven undergoes in a summarized statement. Whereas she once believed in the goodness of the world the way Charles did, she eventually grows to believe that as long as she's different and the world is as prejudiced as it is, peace isn't an option. These characters and their growth and shifts in ideology make First Class a far more interesting film to me than the clashing of simply, humanity needs to be saved no matter how flawed they are, versus all humans must die. This film establishes why the two characters of the original trilogy believe in their causes, and retroactively make lines like this,
You know, look like everyone else.
Because we shouldn't have to.
all the more powerful. I didn't mention the other side characters like Banshee and Havoc, who I believe are far more interesting than characters like Iceman and Pyro, or the villainous Shaw, who brings so much fun and power to his villainous stance. I also didn't mention the incredible action of this film because, at the end of the day, I don't think I need to. I think this film stands above the rest, with the simple dynamic of these three characters and everything else it brings to the table are just fun extras. But anyway, as I stated at the beginning of the video, that's just my opinion, and I'm eager to hear yours. Feel free to leave a comment saying if you like this video, if you agree with my points, or if you have another favourite. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Remember to stay safe in these uncertain times, and my next video in the Daredevil series will be touching amongst the most hopeful take on the character, Mark Waid. Until next time, I'm Character Studied, and thanks for watching.